Because amid widespread protests and bipartisan backlash to the immigration crackdown in Minneapolis, the Trump administration is now shaking up its leadership on the ground there. Top Border Patrol official Gregory Bovino is expected to be removed from commanding the operation in Minnesota. That could come as early as today. That's according to two officials briefed on the matter who tell MS Now there will also be a reduction of federal officers and agents in the state, although the size and scope of that reduction still remains unclear. It comes just days after Bovino rushed to judgment, once again, following the fatal shooting of ICU nurse Alex Preddy, claiming without evidence that the victim intended to massacre law enforcement officers. An additional source tells MS Now that Bovino will be removed from his role as Border Patrol commander at large and will return to his sector in El Centro, California. The Department of Homeland Security, however, is pushing back, claiming he's actually not been relieved of his duties and is a key part of the team, which is it. But with Bovino's expected exit from Minneapolis, President Trump says he's sending Border Czar Tom Homan to oversee operations on the ground, adding that Homan will report directly to him. Joining us now live from the ground in Minneapolis, MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt. Alex, you've been out there covering this story so closely for weeks now. I wonder if you've seen any reaction on the ground to this leadership shakeup and then the potential reduction in federal agents. That's what local officials have been driving towards the entire time.
That's right, Allie. And here on the ground, there is a cautious sense of optimism here to this news that it looks like Bovino's on his way out, that Homan's on his way in, that Governor Walz and the mayor here, Jacob Frey, have both spoken with the president. And Jacob Frey says that in his conversation, the president has pledged to withdraw at least some federal agents as soon as today. But this optimism is cautious because of what the community here has been through, not just this past week, but really for 2 months now. Remember, at the beginning of December, President Trump called the Somali diaspora here, some 81,000 strong, garbage. Shortly thereafter, DHS announced Operation Metro Surge, their immigration raid here in the Twin Cities. A couple of weeks after that, of course, the tragic killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent. And after that happened, the Trump administration only doubled and tripled down, sending even more federal agents. Then in the last week or so, we saw, of course, 5-year-old Liam Ramos, a little boy detained by ICE and sent to a detention center in Texas. And of course, this past Saturday, Alex Preddy shot and killed. 2 people shot and killed by federal agents within just a 17-day period. So while there is some hope here on the ground among local politicians, among protesters, among community members, that this situation may be taking a turn for the better, the perpetual state of trauma has the optimism oh so cautious. Allie?
It makes a lot of sense that they would feel that way. And then, of course, I mean, you're experiencing it live with us right now. The blistering cold, you can hear, I think, snowplows in the background of your report. Just a reminder that these thousands of people, as well as folks like you, Alex, documenting all of this, are out there against the elements because they feel so moved to take a stand right now. MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt, live with us from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for your work. You know, Alex touches on something, the fact that there's really new lines of communication that might lend to that cautious optimism on the ground. It's because President Trump spoke with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey separately by phone yesterday, calls that both sides described as productive amid rising tensions following those 2 fatal shootings by federal agents. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said Walz requested that they work together, calling it a very good call and writing that the 2 leaders seem to be on a similar wavelength. Trump added that he told Walz he could have Border Czar Tom Homan reach out and said the governor very respectfully understood the administration's enforcement priorities. Walz echoed that tone in a tweet of his own, saying he told the president Minnesota needs impartial investigations into the shootings and a reduction in the number of federal agents in the state. Walz's office said Trump agreed to review federal actions and coordinate more closely with state officials going forward. Again, not clear what the reduction is actually going to be yet. It comes as more Republican senators are calling for an independent and transparent investigation into the deadly shooting of Alex Preddy. At least 9 of them have posted statements about Saturday's shooting, including John Curtis of Utah, who criticized DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. He called her response to Preddy's death premature, adding that it came before all the facts were known and weakened confidence. Same thing that they did, frankly, with Renee Good. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas also said the administration is taking the wrong tone in the aftermath of the shootings in Minnesota.
That immediately when an incident like this happens, they come out guns blazing, that we took out a violent terrorist, hooray. And the problem is, particularly for someone not paying attention, if you're being told this is a mom of three and there's no indication, you know, she's not waving an ISIS flag or doesn't have a suicide vest around her.
Yeah.
Escalating the rhetoric doesn't help, and it actually loses credibility. And so I would encourage the administration to be more measured, to recognize the tragedy and to say we don't want anyone's lives to be lost. And the politicians who are pouring gasoline onto this fire, they need to stop.
It's actually really reasonable. Meanwhile, Senator Rand Paul has summoned the heads of ICE, Border Patrol, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to testify next month before the Homeland Security Committee. But his letter to those officials did not specifically mention the deaths of Freddie or Renee Good. Nevertheless, they'll definitely be on the table. Want to bring in co-host of The Weekend and MS Now senior Washington reporter Eugene Daniels. You know, Eugene, I think when we look at what the administration is doing now when it comes to potentially changing their stance, they've only doubled, tripled, quadrupled down. But now that Homan is reporting to Trump, as if Trump didn't already own this, he owns this. So what are the implications of that now that you see a president who has completely changed his tone and a White House that is seemingly reacting in kind, seemingly?
Yeah, seemingly. And at this point, he seems, Trump, to be frustrated. He's been frustrated with Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary. And so what I see is with Homan reporting directly to Trump, is that he's skipping over all of the leadership of DHS and saying at the end of the day, he should just talk to me. And the decisions that are going to be made on the ground are our decisions. You're right. He's going to own this more so than he has before. Because before, you know, those of us watching mostly hear Stephen Miller, right, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, and Kristi Noem talking, and then Bovino kind of going on TV and being blustery. That's not going to happen anymore. But I will say what's really interesting about this is both for Stephen Miller's comments and for Kristi Noem's comments that the White House press secretary did not, she didn't disavow them, but she didn't support them and defend them. Both of them are taking cues from Donald Trump. This is what happens when you have a president who only doubles down and only insulates when these things happen. They did exactly what they did with Renee Good, and Donald Trump supported them then. This is changing because of those Republicans.
He watched that in the Oval Office with New York Times reporters and said that he didn't see a problem with it. I mean, that is so crucial. And then I think the way that we're watching Republican pushback, yes, I'm interested in what's happening on the Hill, and we'll go there in a second. But when I see Senator Ted Cruz and then also Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, you know, I always look at Texas as like a MAGA incubator. Yes. They have certainly led the charge on everything from immigration enforcement to abortion restriction. What do you see in the fact that these are some of the people saying, no, I think we've gone a little too far here? What does it say about the limits that even MAGA will accept?
Yeah, because at some point you can't defend things, right? I think, and everybody has their line. Some people's line is much further than others, and it seems like Abbott and Cruz have hit their line. First of all, there's a Second Amendment issue that kind of complicates this for some of the Republicans, right? That this was a permit, someone who had a permit and who had his gun on his hip. There's no proof that he went to grab it or was brandishing it at the law enforcement, the federal law enforcement officials. So that makes it hard for them to defend it, I think, just because they are such staunch Second Amendment supporters. And also 2028, right? There are going to be times as we move forward into this presidential election, though it seems very far away, that folks like Ted Cruz, folks like Greg Abbott are going to find ways to differentiate themselves on the most unpopular aspects of this administration's policies. And the way that ICE and CBP have been operating is very unpopular in the United States. So there's a political calculation here.
The political calculation also lands squarely on Capitol Hill, where Democrats, including people who helped to avoid the last shutdown and avert it, rather, they certainly didn't avoid it, are now saying, I'm not going to vote for this DHS funding bill. I think it's important that we point out to people this shutdown, if it happens, would be different because it would be a partial, not a full government shutdown. They're also working to separate out just this DHS funding bill. That seems like a way to do it with limited harm to the rest of government agencies. But what do you see in this, the way that Republicans now on the Hill are positioning themselves? And again, it's different from the way that they did it after Renee Good, in the House, they passed a DHS funding
Very
bill
quickly,
in that interim period of a week and a half.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that is interesting about what we're seeing now is even the Democrats, there are 7 Democrats that voted for the bill that came out of the House. Even a couple of them have said, I actually regret that vote because I wasn't seeing it as a connection between what's happening on the ground and the DHS funding that we said yes to. I mean, Democrats are putting a lot of pressure on Republicans, both publicly and privately, to move away from voting for this or figuring out what to do with the DHS. But I talked to a couple senators this weekend who told me, Democratic senators, who said, for some of them, that's not just enough to pull the DHS funding out of the larger bill, but they need to actually see some real changes in the tactics. It's not just the money, it's the tactics that Democrats have issues with. Whether or not that actually comes to terms with, that actually happens, we'll see, right? But at the end of the day, Chuck Schumer said they don't want the DHS funding in there. It seems like the Republicans might be on that path.
Yeah, and I can't underscore enough what a change in posture that is from Senate Democratic leadership all the way on down through the Senate Democratic rank and file. There was very little appetite for a shutdown even just 2 weeks ago. Now I think it is so squarely in focus. I don't know how we avoid it. But again, these things look imminent right up until the moment that they are not. MS Now senior Washington reporter, co-host of The Weekend, Eugene Daniels, thank you. And thank you for braving the snow and ice for coming in with us, too.
Always.